Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, well, here we are, finally, the first week of fall. After a long and humid summer, we're now in a nice, humid first week of fall. But let's just put the weather aside. What better way to ring in this time of year than with some good old-fashioned ghost stories? Welcome back to another riveting installment of Myths and Monsters. As always, I am Billy Reed.
I am Curtis Cooper, your weekly co-host.
And we're joined by some guests tonight. Let's go around the table.
Hi, I'm Courtney Block. I am the user engagement librarian here on campus.
And I am Bradley Cooper, and you might have heard me. I am the host of the Dank History Show, and I also used to be on the now dead and haunted,
The extinct.
Let's Talk Dinosaurs.
The late and great.
The late and great.
Let's talk dinosaurs.
We're talking dank myths today.
Yeah.
Its ghouls still haunt this place.
We still have Big Roy the T-Rex over there.
Big Roy. His name is Big Roy, huh?
Yeah, that was his name. I forget who. I think I came up with that name. I don't remember.
It sounds like a Billy name to come up with.
And two of our tiny dinosaurs from when we did our IUS dinos thing.
Hashtag IUS Dinos.
That will never die.
We're going to
That
have
was
to
the
do
best thing
hashtag
ever.
IUS Spooks coming up here soon.
I wanted to go
Yes.
find like little tiny Bigfoot toys to
Oh, that would
put
be
all over
amazing.
campus.
Yes,
but-
I have one that I can donate to this cause. I have a tiny little Bigfoot ornament I keep in my office, and I will gladly donate.
Now we're talking.
Yes, yes.
Bigfoot.
Hashtag IUS Sasquatch. IU Squatch.
I watch.
Yes.
But anyway, tonight this is going to be good because tonight is going to be the first of many nights where we discuss ghosts,
And we went on a field trip.
specters, phantasms.
Fiends.
What?
Ectoplasm.
But anyway, so ghosts. Ghosts exist in pretty much all cultures, mythologies, religions. Such a huge part of world mythology. One of the few mythical creatures that exist in pretty much all cultures across the globe. Right up there with dragons and werewolves and the amount of cultures that had nothing to do with each other that still have stories of ghosts and other beings of that nature. So obviously several accounts and urban legends of ghosts still exist to this day, and there are far too many of them for it to just be, nothing. Like, people have to be seeing something. So the question is really for me, what are ghosts? What are people seeing?
We gonna break it down today.
Oh yes, so me, Curtis, and Brad, and Brad's wife, Katie.
Brad's wife.
Greatest former Cracker Barrel employee
Yes,
of all time.
11 years of service.
11 years of service.
Wow.
Yeah. Sorry, we have a lot of jokes.
There's so many
Storming.
inside jokes that
So-
I guarantee you most of the people not
Okay,
listening
so
now don't know
there
what we're
used to
talking
be this internet meme with this old 60-year-old man named Brad whose wife got fired from Cracker Barrel, and he commented on all of Cracker Barrel's social medias why did you fire my wife? Why did
Yes,
you
I remember
so
hearing about this.
It became a meme to go on to Cracker Barrel's social medias and say why did you fire Brad's wife?
11 years of service.
Our Brad, his wife Katie, I always make fun of her and say hey, how's Cracker Barrel these days? So
Yeah, she
'cause
never
she's-
has
'cause
worked
she's
at Cracker
Brad's
Barrel.
wife, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm told she
about. It's a
doesn't.
myth.
It is a myth.
Ring the bell.
So anyway, so here in our area, we're in southern Indiana, just across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. There are no shortage of ghost stories here. A lot of spooky, haunted
Lots of spooks.
places. So me, Brad, Curtis, and Brad's wife, Katie, we went and investigated one such place this last week. We went to Bridgewater Cemetery, about 40 minutes up the road in Scottsburg, Indiana.
One of the oldest cemeteries in Indiana.
Very spooky place. And before we get into our experience there and what we saw there, we got to talk about the history of this place and why it's so creepy, because a lot of sketchiness surrounding this place.
Oh, yeah.
This cemetery dates back to about the early 1800s, and a lot of the people buried there are Civil War soldiers and very, very young children.
There's also one thing I read today that was interesting, because apparently the cemetery that it's named at, the guy whose name it's named after, he was a Revolutionary War veteran that died in about the 1830s, the original
Fascinating.
Bridgewater, and his whole family's basically buried there.
Yeah, I remember we saw his grave.
Yeah.
And his grave was actually pretty well kept up compared to a lot of the others.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
it looked pretty clean, but...
So Billy, tell me, what kind of Civil War soldiers are buried there? Union, Confederacy? A mix of the two?
I think a mix of the two, yeah. Because Indiana was a neutral state, right?
It wasn't a neutral state, but it was close enough to the South that a lot of people would go to either side. You saw that a lot in Indiana and Kentucky,
and,
too.
yeah, Indiana and Kentucky were basically neutral states.
But probably the scariest and creepiest thing about people who are buried there is there are a lot of slaves that are buried in the cemetery in unmarked graves. Now, slavery in Indiana during the Civil War, slavery was illegal by then, but slavery was legal here at one point.
Complicated history.
Yeah, in the early 1800s, abolitionists took control of the Indiana Territory and started pushing for the abolition of slavery in the state. And finally, Indiana slaves were freed in 1820. But by that point, several slaves had not only been buried in Bridgewater Cemetery, but they were actually hanged there in a very big old oak tree that's still at the front of the property to this day. So
Bad news.
It's a really creepy tree.
bad.
You can check
juju.
out those pictures on our social medias.
Yeah, we took many pictures of the cemetery. So, yeah, a lot of freaky juju around there. Now, as for local legends and what people claim they see around this cemetery, now, ghosts are said to be drawn to places with dark auras and negative energy and that kind of thing. And I don't really know how to gauge darkness and negative energy, but if I had to guess a place that had a lot of bad juju, it would be this place. I mean,
We're still working on developing the ultimate instrument to measure that.
yeah, our ultimate specter detector.
Exactly.
Spectre
Nice.
detector. Measured at ectoplasm.
I have a prototype put together right now, which totally isn't just a plastic shark taped to a squirt gun.
What's the
So-
shark for?
Well, you see, history shows that sharks are very good at measuring phantasmal projections. Okay?
There you go. Now in development, audience. You heard it here first.
I totally didn't just BS that. But anyway, so in terms of local legends and what people claim they see around this place, the most common thing people say they see are either red or white lights coming from the tree line around the cemetery, as well as ghostly voices that they say the later you go, around like 2 or 3 a.m. is the more likely when you're going to hear this. But they say like ghostly whispers and angry voices will start talking in your ear, which is creepy. There's also said to be a sudden drop in temperature on the property, which often comes with cold chills and shivers while you're there.
A lot of ghost myths have reports of dropping temperatures.
Yeah. It's also said that electronics won't function in the cemetery, as well as car batteries have been known to die when parked outside the gates.
Now, side note, we will get to our own experiences, but we did park our car literally like right outside the gate, left it on because we wanted to leave the headlights on because we're weenies. But the car battery was okay, so the ghosts
Yeah.
passed over us that night, thankfully.
I have heard stories of other places like that where people go up there, they'll park their car, completely new car, new battery, they turn it off, and the battery just dies. And they
Yeah.
have to shove it off, whatever the haunted area is,
Well,
for
like
the restart.
when we went there that night and I brought my camera, I had 2 batteries fully charged and ready to go just in case that happened to us. But
Planning ahead.
anyway, so the 2 most common things that have been seen there, along with like the red and white lights from the trees, and this next one is actually a pretty common phenomenon that's been seen in a lot of quote unquote haunted cemeteries, is people say that large red-eyed black dogs have been seen in this cemetery, and will sometimes that's what they
Cerberus.
call them, like hellhounds, I think is what they call them. And sometimes they say these dogs will like hover around people's cars and like not let them get to their car. So
Oh, fun.
that's weird. But perhaps the creepiest and most persistent urban legend surrounding the cemetery is that of a white horse.
Oh, I like horses,
And
though.
they say this thing is
Horses.
seen in the cemetery, and it has a saddle. Sometimes it's seen with a rider, sometimes it's not. But they
It's
say
the ghost
this,
of Stonewall Jackson.
That's the ghost of Stonewall Jackson.
Jackson! There he is, standing like a wall. Floating.
That's an Anchorman 2 reference.
Anchorman 2 is the foremost authority on ghosts, if the listeners were not aware of that.
And Anchorman 2 also proves that werewolves are real, and they're also Harrison Fords.
They are real,
Yeah.
and they are
Yeah.
Harrison Ford.
Yeah. Anyway, they say this horse is not friendly, and it will chase you off of the cemetery grounds if it sees you. So,
It's a
spooky.
mad horse.
Make us
So-
a ghost horse sound, Brad. That was pretty good, actually. That might be your
wasn't bad.
best sound
That wasn't
I've
bad.
heard you make on podcast
That was
format.
pretty impressive.
I don't know. His whale sound. Was
Okay, that's
pretty
true.
good.
Did he make it on a podcast though?
Did
I
I?
think he made it on one episode of Let's Talk Dinos.
No, the horse sound was
no,
better.
The horse is
sounds
better. The
Yeah.
horse is better. So anyway, boys, we investigated Bridgewater Cemetery.
We
and,
did.
We have some stuff to talk about because we saw some things there. So we arrived at the cemetery about 9:30 this last Saturday night. It was very dark, and by the way, it's very spooky. Like it's this like you expect it to be out in the back roads. It's way out in the boonies. Like
Oh yeah.
you have to drive through a bunch of farmland, and then you get on this old gravel road, which has a bunch of trees that are so overgrown their branches are hitting your car. And at the very top of this hill on this old gravel road, you come up to like the old iron gates, and it's creepy. Just such a weird vibe when you pull up to this place.
Yeah, like we were driving and literally like we're driving on asphalt and then like literally Brad's just like, yeah, you're gonna want to slow down right here, and then it just hits gravel.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like happens out of nowhere, just like whoa, it just got real.
And also, like, if you look at if you've ever seen like illustrated drawings of Dante's Inferno when the people are first entering hell, what the gate looks like, that's basically what the Bridgewater Cemetery gate looks like.
Yeah,
It's
it was
very
such like a-
arch words.
It's so freaky.
It was such a classical looking gate. It was like really, really beautiful in that way, I thought.
Also, just a great story for you. When we were driving up to it, we're driving through these thick trees, and a creature, which in my mind I thought was like a Jersey Devil or something, jumps out in front of us, and we all kind of collectively jump. And then, like, once the adrenaline fades away, we all look to see that it was, in fact, a rabbit.
It was a rabbit.
A rabbit.
A
rabbit.
Well, how big was this rabbit for you to think it was the Jersey Devil?
I mean, it was fairly large.
It was
Okay.
something that
This
moved
was-
and adrenaline was involved.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so it was a very big, very, very large rabbit. Like,
At
I would
least
say,
8 foot tall.
Yeah, like,
I believe
foot
it.
tall.
like, yeah, big rabbit.
Did you guys encounter other people when you were out there?
Oh,
That's
so-
cool.
funny story.
Right when
Yeah.
we left, this car full of like 15-year-olds pulls up.
No.
So
Yeah.
Just like, hello, fellow ghost hunter.
Yeah.
It was weird about was when we saw a car was coming, I'm like, oh man, it's probably the cops. And then I'm like, oh, it might be the owners. And then I'm like,
Right.
no, it's just a bunch of kids.
This is just how ghost hunters make friends, though.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Ne'er-do-wells.
How did you
That's
guys
true.
meet each other? Well, funny enough, one night in a cemetery.
Yeah.
It's like the edgiest thing ever.
Yeah.
It's the start of a beautiful love story.
But anyway, right when you pull up, one of the first things you see is the old hanging tree because it's like right out in front of the gates, and that tree's creepy. But we didn't stop by there until we left, and so we went in, we checked out some of the graves, we took some photos, and I'm gonna save the photo for last because I think that's probably the creepiest thing we have from that night. But you guys have anything to say? about any-
You go first, Brad. I want to go last. At least before the picture.
Okay. So what I've been there before, and I went during the daytime. And during the daytime, it still has a unusual energy, but it's a little more peaceful. But you can see all the graves more clearly, and you can see just how many of them are destroyed, and the contrast between those that are well kept. A lot of them are unmarked. A lot of the names are scratched off. Another thing about it during the day you can see is that there's a big gap between like the ones in the front and the ones in the back. And that gap is just that in that gap is where the creepy stuff happens. And what we experienced when we went in. So when we first get there, obviously adrenaline is rushing. We're all a little, on edge. So first we're a little afraid, but once we're all there and kind of looking at the graves at the start, it's like, okay, this is a pretty peaceful place.
Yeah, it's really quiet out there.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no
Yeah.
people or anything. Like
Very tranquil.
just crickets.
Yes, and what's interesting about that is most of the time when I go to cemeteries, like I feel weird almost because it's a place of great death and despair and places like that. But in here, I'm like the first half of it, I felt very at peace. So we're looking around these graves, but the further in we go, and part of this is just due to our flashlights, but the gnats just keep on getting worse and worse and worse.
They
the
really
farther.
swarmed you though. I
Yes,
noticed.
and Katie, she was there. My wife
Yeah.
was there too. And they started to swarm around us. And once we started getting towards the center, because here's what you have to understand about this cemetery. Most of the graves are in the front, and there's a huge amount of them like way towards the back, towards the tree line.
But like in between the ones in the front and the ones on the tree line, there's just a big blank patch of grass.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot there. at
Yes.
all.
And when we're looking across there, at least me, Katie, and Billy all got this sense of do not go any further.
Didn't Katie say she got like a really sharp pain in her stomach.
Yes. Is that what happened to you?
Well, like what happened to me is this is a really stupid way to put it, but the best way I can describe it is it was like this spidey sense came over me, just like this weird feeling, just telling me, don't go back there. Like
Yeah.
it was just like, don't go back there. You're not gonna like it. Just turn back. It's not worth it. So
The headlights
Yeah.
that we were also like feeding off of, like from it was my car that we took. There was also the fact that the headlights like only reached about halfway into the cemetery. So after that halfway point cut off, like it was like, oh, it's like the big unknown in the second half of the
Yeah,
cemetery.
that's definitely true. Although for me, it was like that. I don't know necessarily how much the headlights added to the experience for me, but because having the flashlights, it was like, okay, we can see pretty clearly.
these were really bright flashlights.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
very bright.
Excellent flashlights that Billy bought.
Yeah, it was very strange that all three of us had that same reaction at the exact same time, and the energy seemed to be much different emanating from that place. And what I can say about that place is people come there fairly often just to look at the graves. Like when I visited during the daytime, there were pennies all over the place and stuff like that. But one thing I found, and I've talked with this about with several of my friends, when you go to most cemeteries, most of the people there were buried somewhat recently, 2010, even, this year. So when you visit those places, like my friend said, it's almost like visiting your grandparents in the nursing home or something like that, or an older relative. But when you go to places where everyone there died in like the 1800s or something like that,
Oh, it's a different vibe.
yes, different
Yeah.
vibe, and it's almost like there's nothing to remember there, which just makes it an even...
Like there's nobody alive today who remembers anybody who's buried.
Yes,
there.
it makes it a very existentially terrifying
Yeah.
experience.
It's like a hollowing out
Yeah.
that you feel.
That's
Yes.
a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my friend put it this way, it's like you're emptied out by going to
Yeah.
places like that. And I've seen some pretty terrifying looking cemeteries. I was just visiting one the other day that's just like a park. The family that bought that land, it's called Brown Park in Kentucky, Louisville. And they just have their graves there, but all of their graves are knocked over, like completely knocked over. There's even one that's like one of those above ground boxes that people would often be buried in, and that one's just caved in and opened up.
Oh, that's
And
creepy.
if there was a body in there, it was either stolen or it's decayed. So places like that are just weird places. So Curtis, what do you have to say? Oh, go
I
ahead.
just want to add there were a couple of graves in particular in that place that were the Bridgewater that we went to. A couple of graves that were really creepy. I remember we saw a couple of the unmarked ones where the slaves were buried.
Yeah.
Those were pretty creepy to me.
There's also a weird one. There was a YouTube video I was watching that pointed this out. It just said NEO on one of the graves, and no one
Yeah.
knows what that means. It could mean that the derogatory term they would use for black
Yeah,
people.
that's one of the
Yeah.
more like harrowing, I guess, elements of like older cemeteries to me is like there are graves that no one knows like what's written on that. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like there were a lot of graves there where the inscription had just eroded away, so you don't even know who was buried there.
Yeah, it's just like dead history.
And there was
Yeah.
one grave there that we saw though that was from a baby, and the it wasn't even a year old. Like the birth date was March, and the death date was December that same year.
yeah, it was
So
really sad.
That was sad, and that just was really freaky too. And that was another one of the more well kept up graves in the place.
Yeah, it was weird because I'd say about 5 or 6 of them were really well kept.
Yeah.
There was even one of them that the last person
Yeah, by
died in
the-
like the 1950s or something.
Yeah, the one that was right by the hanging tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it one of the Bridgewaters?
No, it
No, it was
wasn't.
some other family.
I thought it was
some
the Owens
family
or
plot.
something like
Yeah.
that.
They must be some kind of like local family or something.
Yeah, and you can look up the records of who's buried there, and I looked up some of them, and most of them are recorded, but the unmarked ones, no one knows who's
Who are
there.
the ones that are buried like way back in the tree line where we
It
didn't get
didn't.
to?
The records I looked at did not specify.
Like the location of the graves.
No, my friend said the legend is that witches are buried back there.
Huh.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
That's creepy. But were witch trials that big of a thing in Indiana?
No, there
No,
were
they
no
didn't reach out
witch
here.
trials. Like the last witch trial was in the 1690s.
Yeah, no one even settled in Indiana by then.
But there were
Other
a
than
lot
Native
of
Americans.
There were a lot of legends during that time, especially in the 1800s, of people doing stuff like that, like summoning spirits, trying to summon the devil,
Yeah.
interacting with demons, all sorts of stuff like that.
And a lot of that was like the church being like super controlling of people and trying to scare people.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of the website findagrave.com?
Yes, I have.
Okay, cool. It's another place that like I think a lot of people submit their own photos, but it can be a place to find
I
information
gotcha.
about.
Kind of like a wiki.
Yeah, and it's just maybe a cool place where you can get info on some of these older cemeteries that maybe, you're not quite sure what this says. You can find it on findagrave.com.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Oh, we might have to look into that.
Yeah. What's weird about the Bridgewater guy who was buried there is I looked up some of his information and we don't know a whole lot about him. We know he probably came over from England in the 1700s and he fought in the Revolutionary War, and we know what his will looks like, but we don't know much about why he decided to be buried there.
That is a little weird.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
strange.
And apparently that there are still some Bridgewaters alive. They live in Wyoming or something like that.
Interesting.
So,
All right.
boys.
So when I got there, I did have some similar feelings to everyone else in that I did notice a really if I had to put a word to it, it would be I noticed a really traumatic feel to the cemetery. There was this feeling of pressure, not even necessarily that I felt necessarily, I guess, dark or uneasy, but I did notice this feeling of trauma, and I think that a lot of that was due to the history that we had looked up beforehand, and some of the background to the hanging tree and stuff like that. But what I really thought about when I was walking through this cemetery, and what I really felt was that this cemetery, almost more so than any other historical plot and cemeteries like this, were really characteristic of a country that has a lot of demons in the closet, Like Billy mentioned, there were Union soldiers, Confederate soldiers, and slaves all buried in this one cemetery. So while on one instance you have the good guys, or at least who we hold up as the good guys of the Civil War buried there, but you also have the aggressors and the victims buried there as well. So I got this sense of this tension and almost this war feeling from a country that was literally eating itself from the inside in the 1850s and 60s, and way before that too, because there was so much tension that existed before the Civil War. So I thought that this it's a tiny cemetery too.
It's very small.
Yeah.
It literally only took us a few minutes just to go as far as we did before turning back. And just in this tiny patch of land, I really felt this epitomized both the good and the bad of America and stuff like that. Even today, there's a lot of good that the country does, and there's also a lot of bad that the country does, and that's the same with every country, obviously. Not we're gonna go on some patriotic or anti-patriotic rant on this podcast, but that's what I really found fascinating about this cemetery, and the overall unease that I got was, I guess, more fueled by the historical background and the historical almost musings that I had while I was walking through it.
Right.
And that got me to think about why do ghost stories exist? And we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the show, and what I'm sure the listeners will start to figure out is that usually me and Billy are co-hosts, so normally no matter what side he presents, I'll usually present the opposite side, so that we have, if you have a podcast that's just all unbelief or all belief, then it's kind of boring because both people are just harping on the same thing. But I like to kind of look at a more social, I guess, literal context, what all these myths are all about. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, I think that a lot of ghost myths are founded around the idea of trauma, and the fact that the whole idea of ghosts being in existence because of some kind of unfinished business. I think it's a really base human, I guess, hope that if someone is wronged, that ultimately they will find justice for it. That they will, I guess, come back, and if they didn't get revenge on somebody for killing them or assaulting them or something, that they will do it just in a different plane of existence. And I think that's a very uniquely special human trait that we have, where we're listen, the world is messed up a lot of the time, but we believe that there should always be justice deep down. And I think that's what a lot of ghost mythology is based around, is that like something wrong was done and it should be righted. And whether it's the universe or whether it's some kind of religious order, like something is going to right the scales. And that's what I really thought about as well when I was thinking about like, what do ghosts have to do with the human condition and like humanity in general? So those were some of my random musings and ramblings about the ghost experience.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of ghost stories that tend to revolve around places that have weird stuff around it, particularly like, bad, violent stuff.
Oh yeah.
And part of that's just because it's easier for the human imagination to sort of, think about there still being a bad presence and energy there.
Yeah,
and because
absolutely.
you can see bad energy even in places like if you visit a house where there's a lot of conflict, people fight all the time.
Yeah, like an abusive home or something like that.
Yes, even if you don't see it happening, sometimes you can still sense the energy.
Yeah, like the tension.
Yeah, and with Ghost, it depends because
Oh, absolutely.
a lot of them are those traumatic places, but some of them are just no one knows why there's all these presences or
Oh, yeah.
activities.
And on Myths and Monsters, like blanket statements are outlawed at Myths and Monsters. We will try to never make any blanket statements. Like obviously, what I just talked about doesn't obviously cover every ghost story. It doesn't cover like maybe even the majority of it, but it's just something that I observed.
Well, Billy, what do you think of that law as co-host?
No blanket statements.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Doesn't
it's what we're
really-
all about.
Good,
Doesn't really go against anything we've done.
No,
good.
we just
Other
evaluate
than-
things.
Other
critically.
than the statement that owls are the ultimate evil.
Owls are the ultimate evil,
Yeah.
and that is the number one
And
commandment.
bobcats. Don't forget the bobcats.
And bobcats.
They're
I
coming.
do love bobcats, though.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
they're-
that this is a really great way to put that, though, like, especially when you're dealing with topics like the paranormal stuff that is kind of on the fringe. I think it's great to say that there's no blanket statements because at the end of the day, we don't really know, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
Otherwise, we just write one book about it, like, oh, this is how it works. That's it.
exactly.
There's no
And
real way to know.
How boring also would that be? So I think that the sort of no blanket statements also allows you to keep an open mind about
Absolutely.
the possibility and muse about all of these different things because the paranormal is such a subjective
Absolutely.
experience that draws upon your own personal experiences just as a human, but
Yeah.
also your religious background, your cultural background. I mean, so many things go into it, and it's kind of funny how you put it. You sort of centered it around trauma, and I kind of look at it as a way of the human sort of collective consciousness.
Ooh, we're getting Jungian up in here.
Yeah,
I like
let's do
that. I
it.
like that a lot.
That it's sort of reaching out and hoping that there is something beyond.
Absolutely.
And so I kind of see that as very hopeful and very positive.
I got you.
Yeah, so I think that sometimes in our culture, which is kind of dominated by this Judeo-Christian kind of, outlook that, once you're dead, your soul goes somewhere. It won't stick around because, that's purgatory and that's bad. And, it's so it's just kind of, it's cool to hear a different perspective.
Yeah. So what's
of-
interesting about that is that and mainstream Christianity is particularly, they tend to really focus on the idea that spirits can't communicate with you and stuff like that. But in the Old Testament specifically, there does seem to be an idea that spirits can talk.
Yeah.
Because there are stories about spirits being summoned and spirits speaking. And one way I've kind of looked at ghosts is sometimes maybe it's not necessarily like an intelligence, but more of like almost like a primal emotion that's been left over.
Yes.
Something big happened, something bad happened, or maybe even something good.
Soul residue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like residue.
Yeah, and there's this big theory kind of now that's dominating the paranormal stream of thought. You guys have probably heard about this, that we as humans, as living humans, are creating these paranormal experiences through stuff like egregores and tulpas and these thought forms that we put so much energy and thought into
Oh,
that
yeah,
it's
so-
literally
yeah, I gotcha.
creating.
It's like almost like existential paranormalism.
Or like,
Yes.
yeah, like
Something that.
the existential butterfly effect.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I
And
love that a
it's
lot.
just a big thing that I hear a lot of people talking about nowadays, and I think that's really cool. Somebody actually talked about how they remember when Waverly, quote, wasn't haunted, but because of all of the just energy that living people bring and are pouring into it, like year after year, it's created.
Well, like the thing about Waverly is,
interesting.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about that because
Yeah.
Waverly has really become a huge tourist trap.
Right.
You know, like they do a haunted house every year. It's like $60 a night to go check it out. An episode of Supernatural was filmed there. So
Really?
yeah, those two pretty boys went and fought some demons there or something. I don't watch
Is
Supernatural.
that the title of the episode?
Yeah, pretty boys
Yeah.
go and fights. That's the
you know-
whole
Yeah,
show.
it's the title of
That's
Right.
the whole show. Pretty boys go
Yeah.
and fights. I don't watch it. My mom watches it. The only time I watched a little bit of it is I walked by the room while she was watching it, and I was like, "Is that a Hailstorm song on in the background?"
That's
Oh
what I'm
crap!
talking
Maybe I
about.
should watch this show.
So, I have an idea. So, we talk a lot about traumatic places being where a lot of this activity is. Do you all think a place like Auschwitz, sorry to bring the mood down, but a place like Auschwitz would have a lot of really bad mojo and energy?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
like,
I think so, and how I kind of think of it is that any sort of outpouring of intense emotion, I think, leaves an imprint no matter where you go.
Yeah.
And just when you kind of said that, my initial thought was that maybe more so residual energy from, like, I don't know, just maybe on the side of the oppressors with such
Yeah.
just intense hatred
Yeah,
that
right.
is unparalleled, you know. So I think that you do see it anywhere there's these really intense outpourings
Oh,
of
yeah, and like, okay, we're gonna get a little metaphysical for a second, and
Let's do it.
I love getting metaphysical, so
Same.
this is just me like jumping on the table. But I think in terms of like what I believe in, like what's kind of like a essential like physical force that like I've thought like has a really high chance of existing is like the whole idea of like the string theory, where like everything, whether it's matter or like anything that exists, is connected by like these invisible strings, and kind of like one thing affects the other always, and like whether no matter what like religion and creed that you might adhere to, like it works with pretty much every creed, because like if there is like a outside force that imposes her or its will on the universe, like God or something like that, like it would make sense that they would use some kind of mechanism to carry that out. And I think that like the whole idea of the string theory like works not only for that but also for like the supernatural. And like when you talked about like emotions having an effect on the world and like the physical like plane, like that absolutely goes along with that theory that I was talking about. And I lost my thought. Oh, what was it?
String theory.
string theory and
string
metaphysical.
Yeah, and just like those emotions can like manifest into the world. And I think it was like, have you ever read the book Dune? Have you all heard of the book Dune? Like it's super metaphysical and super cool. Like I would recommend you read it. I haven't read all of it, but I want to. And there's this quote that says, a thought in your mind, no matter whether you vocalize it or not, it's a thing that exists, and
Yes.
it doesn't just go to waste. And I definitely believe that a lot. Like, if you think something, then like, in a certain like, I guess, electrical sense, it's real.
Yes.
So, Billy, what is your overall opinion on ghosts? Do you tend to lean towards them being like? Is that? I don't know if I want to get into like the final question of the show.
No, we got more to talk about. So,
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I really have no idea. But like, I feel like it's hard to say. Like, I've heard it said that ghosts are kind of just emotions that get bent out of shape. You know, so it's possible that ghosts could just be like leftover energy, from
Yeah.
people who have stuff left behind or that kind of thing. But it's really just it's hard to say. But I'm not 100% sure if ghosts are real or not. I think it's likely, but I think there are also other explanations for
I
it,
gotcha.
especially like social and mythological
Yeah,
stuff.
for me personally, I definitely believe there's an afterlife. As far as ghosts go, I tend to think that something like a ghostly presence has to exist, because when you look at all these stories, like, yes, there are a lot of them that aren't true. There are a lot of them that made up. There are a lot of them that can be explained. But
Yeah.
when there's so many, there has to be some truth to it.
It's almost a universal human experience.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's the same way, like, if you look at legends that come up over and over and over in history. And by legend, I don't necessarily mean untrue, but just a story that's told over and over. Like, for example, the flood narrative that's in almost almost every society from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern Hemisphere has some sort of flood narrative. So something, a localized flood or something traumatic like that had to have happened. And I think that's the same thing with Ghost. So that's my thought.
I gotcha.
Before we move on, we do have to talk about the one picture I took at the
Yes,
cemetery
that's
the other
going to
night.
tie a nice bow on the Scottsburg.
So I took a ton of photos that night. Like, I took a lot of photos there. And that night, me and Brad were up till about midnight scanning through all of these, trying to find
Yes.
anything. And in about all of them, we found a lot of, like, little weird glowing dots. But the one that stuck out most to me, Courtney, I don't know if you saw this or not. It was on our Twitter.
I might have
but
seen it.
It was this photo right here. And if you just let me zoom in, you can see that little white glowing dot right there
Yeah.
in the trees.
That's
And,
interesting.
I put that on our Twitter and on our Instagram, and all you guys on Twitter, you made it abundantly clear. You guys think it was just a bug or it's just a glitch in a camera. Appreciate your feedback, I really
a
do. But so yeah, I get it. There are a million explanations for what that photo could be, and in all likelihood, it's nothing. It was probably just feedback from a camera flash or something like that. I just find that really interesting that one of the most commonly reported things at that cemetery is lights and flashing things coming from the trees.
Yeah, I've heard that
And listeners, we're going to ask you to do this more often than not. Please humor us, because this is fun and awesome.
Right, because isn't half the fun just wondering?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was interesting just how many because the rest of the photos, almost all of them had some sort of orb in it of a
Yeah.
different color, which, from what I understand, a lot of those can be explained by dust. But, again, it's that 1%, what is that?
Yeah. You would almost have to go back and take more, or have somebody who's kind of really skilled and versed in photography take a look
Yeah.
at it to get an idea, because that's super bright. I mean, it kind of seems like a reflection or its own light source. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, but the weird thing is, after I took that photo, I saw that thing pop up on the screen, like when the photo showed back up on the camera, and I looked in those trees, there was nothing there. No street lights or anything shining through. I couldn't see any bugs or anything. So
Yeah.
it's possible it was just feedback from a
And
camera
we saw
flash.
Right.
one of
It
them
was,
that definitely was a bug,
yeah.
but we were able
Yeah.
to zoom in and see it had wings.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there was one that we could definitely tell was a bug. But when I first saw that photo, it almost looked like a flame to me.
Yeah.
That was,
Yeah.
that
But
was
I
a little
think
weird.
I think that's kind of the cool part of this, is just kind of turning it back on you and saying, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
What was your experience?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure what the thing in that photo is. And like I said, it's very good likelihood that it's nothing, but I just think that's interesting that the most commonly reported thing there are glowing orbs, and that's
Yeah.
the most
And-
defined thing that showed up in our photo. So
And one thing people talk about a lot is what the different colors of the orbs mean, because we got a lot of different colors. We got white, blue, I think we got one or two yellow.
yeah, there was a
And-
blue one near the hanging tree.
Yes,
that we got.
and most of white and blue, good vibes, and this is according, people who, I don't know.
I don't know who determines
I don't know
this,
who determines
but
but
according to people who claim they know what they're talking about, white orbs are good
According to the
vibes.
Ghost Reddit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
According to the Ghost Bureau.
whereas yellow means more caution. So, and if they are anything, that would make sense, because especially the cemetery had such a peaceful feel towards the front and not so much towards the back.
And that photo was taken towards the front.
Yes,
So.
yes, that's right.
Now, for our last 15 minutes here, Courtney, we know you run the ghost tour here
Yes.
at IUS, and you have plenty of ghost stories about the
Oh my
IUS
gosh.
campus here.
Yes.
Weave us some yarns.
We were just
Oh my
talking about it
goodness.
before we went on the air here, and man, IUS, I always knew this place was weird, but man, I never knew we had so many creepy stories here. So please
Strange.
tell us a story.
Awesome. Well, yeah, first of all, The next Haunted IUS walking tour is going to be Monday, October 28th at 7:30, and meet at the Clock Tower.
That's the
but-
perfect place to meet, by the way.
Right,
It
and
is.
as like the sun is setting and it's getting that sort of like dusky
Ambiance.
white. Yeah, exactly. I usually wear like a big witch hat, and you
That's
know,
great.
it's you can't miss me. But I like what you said about how, you know, I knew IUS was a weird place, but and I think that's important to focus on, because I think a lot of people are kind of surprised when they hear all the stories that I have to share during the tour, because the campus is relatively young. I mean, this campus, this physical location of it is pretty young. But there are stories about the library, about a shadowy figure seen in the library by a member of the facilities crew who called out and said, you know, basically, hi, or I'll be down in just a minute. I think they were on that top floor looking down into that sort of like open air rotunda to the lobby, saw somebody walking, but the person never responded. And so they go downstairs to the main floor, and they're looking around because they just could have sworn that it was, you know, somebody, and they didn't find anybody. And that kind of spooked them out, and they called the campus police. And this was all recounted to me by the campus police in an email. So
That's interesting.
it's not
That's
just
really
You got it in
second.
documentation.
Yeah, I got it.
That's cool.
And so he came and to check it out, and in the email, he reported that he just had that sort of sixth sense that somebody was there. But he never could find anybody.
Was there any like security camera footage?
No, I don't think so. Not that he reported. And I believe that at the end of the email, he said that it's the library is one of the only buildings that, you know, as they tour late at night, or basically secure late at night, that they turn the lights on before
That's fair.
kind of
Right.
investigating. Yeah. I'm not sure if that person is still here, but that was given to me in an email.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Man, that's because like I think of all the papers and homework that I did in the library in my 4 years here, and like how I spent a lot of time on like the bottom floor of the library
Yes.
doing homework in my time here.
And
so
it's funny that you say that, because a little more to the story is that the officer eventually made his way to the bottom floor, the first level, which is the Quiet City floor. And that's where his spidey senses really kind of, you know, perked up. And he decided to kind of try and trick this person, because he was just convinced that somebody was down there. So he hit the buttons to the elevator to kind of make it sound as if he gets on the elevator and goes away, but he tucks around the corner. And after the elevator doors close, after a second, one of the lights in the study rooms go on. And he's like,
man.
gotcha. But I think he got because he went over there and there's nobody in there. And he said he spent so much time trying to debunk, you know, if, you know, they came on, the sensors, you know, switched on after, you know, the air conditioning kicked on, or, you know, something, and he just couldn't figure it out. And
That's
that was basically the end of that. There was, yeah.
It's almost like
Well.
it's almost like whatever was down there was messing with him.
Right.
And it obviously couldn't have been
Yeah.
a person. There's
Yeah.
just, I mean,
It's interesting. Yeah, and there's gosh, I don't. Oh, well, here's a picture. We can share. You can share this, you know, on your Twitter if you want. But a lot of what I get for the Haunted IUS is either from the archives of the Horizon newspaper or other local newspapers, or straight from the people who experienced it themselves. And apparently, in October of 1973, there were several reported sightings of a UFO.
Oh, that's awesome.
And in this picture, that's I'm not sure what, I think it's a portion of UC. Somebody drew what they saw, and it's this giant
That's great.
UFO hovering over the campus late one night. They said it had red, yellow, and green flashing lights, and then it made a buzzing sound. And
So
I just
the,
love that story.
The aliens tried to invade IUS, but the geese scared them away.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
was the Hopkinsville
Yeah.
Goblins
That's
come
how-
back
Yes.
for another
That's
round.
that goose with the broken wing. I call him George
Yeah.
Clooney, but everyone calls him Frank. That's how his wing got broken. Was
Yeah.
fighting the aliens.
I mean, if you look real close, you can actually see a goose sort of like manning the UFO if you look really, really close. That's how the goose
so
got, and that's how the goose came to campus.
They all came with flying. That makes sense. They're
the
like,
aliens
"All right,
abducted the geese,
Yeah,
didn't want
oh
them,
my
and just
God.
dropped them here.
yeah, they're like invincible anyway.
Oh,
so
Frank.
It's funny because Canadian geese in Canada are actually a really endangered species, but down here we've got thousands of them.
Oh.
Crazy.
That's what happened. The aliens took them from Canada and brought them here.
Yeah.
or maybe the aliens are just from Canada.
Could be.
Oh.
You ever realize that Canadians act like aliens would act in a human suit?
Not my Avril. She's perfect.
She's an alien.
No, she's not.
She
But
can
she's
still
one of
be.
the good
She can still be
aliens.
perfect and be an alien.
Nah. She's totally homegrown Canadian. not from Mars. Avril Lavigne is not from Mars.
But Justin Bieber is.
Justin Bieber was a government experiment that escaped.
So do you have any other interesting stories?
I have loads of other interesting stories.
Give us a couple more.
Please,
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
love to
We've
hear
got
that.
we've got 10 minutes.
Nice. I don't want to give away like everything.
So how about this? How about
Yeah.
you give us like two more, and then we'll have our final like ghost, because we always have a discussion at the very end of each show where we give percentages about like, oh, how real is this?
Oh, okay. I like this. So there is, of course, the story about the ghost that resides in the Robinson Theater of the Ogle Center.
Ooh, I can believe that.
Yeah, there's a newspaper article about it that you can find that I have from the Horizon Archive. But in the 90s, I believe there was a woman who lived in the community who passed away, and she was a big supporter of theater and IUS, and she donated a lot of her personal effects to the theater. Like household items, like picture frames and clothes and just all sorts of things. And apparently certain sort of paranormal things started happening in the Robinson Theater after that. Like scripts going missing. I think singing, like phantom singing.
That's fun.
That
Yeah.
sort of stuff. But just kind of stuff moved around and just some phantom singing.
Just some phantom
Yeah.
singing.
Oh, just a few
Yeah.
friendly
Just
phantoms.
some phantom singing.
Friendly
And
ghost songs.
Like, it's like the Haunted Mansion at Disney World. All the ghosts
Right.
just start
I
singing.
like it. Me and Billy waited 3 hours to get on that wonderful ride,
Hour
and
and
it
a
was
half.
worth it.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
like 7, maybe 8 hours that we
It
waited.
was an hour and a half. You were just cranky because it was hot.
It was very hot, and I don't like the heat.
wow. There is
True story, sidetrack for a second.
Yeah,
when we
go.
were in Disney this summer, he was so afraid of the sun that he had to go to Target and buy an umbrella to carry around.
I
like
was
a
literally the
vampire.
friendly neighborhood vampire
Nice.
at the Disney World, and I was
Hey,
not
like-
ashamed at all.
skincare and sun protection. These are real things.
Exactly.
Okay, I
True.
am with you.
Anyway, keep going.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah. Let's see. I do not have any vampire tales from campus, unfortunately.
Any werewolves?
No, I don't, unfortunately. But I do. One of the strange stories that was given to me last year during the tour.
You need to write like a little book that like they keep in the library, like
Rules of
strange,
IUS.
yeah, like strange
Oh, no.
tales.
So I actually am like writing a book.
Oh, that's
funny you
awesome.
say-
Cool.
Yeah, this is terrifying though. This is actually the most terrifying thing, not ghosts. But it's basically going to be a bibliographic resource for like where people can go to find information about paranormal research.
Ooh, I like
that
that.
has
Oh,
been
that's cool.
done throughout the years, because a lot of people don't realize that it's a valid intellectual pursuit, and it has been studied scientifically and rigorously in a lot of different ways. And I like to question what it means and challenge what it means for
Awesome.
something to be worthy of academic pursuit.
Oh, yeah.
But the other story that I'll tell you was actually given to me from a passerby during last year's tour. We were down by the pond, and a student who lives on campus heard me talking and telling stories, and he stopped to share his story about he lives in, at the time, I think maybe like Meadow or one of those lodges over towards Nauvoo. And he wasn't like sleeping really well, and he would be up at really odd hours of the night, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he would walk outside sometimes to just kind of get a breath of fresh air. And I believe he said twice, I believe it was, when he was doing that, he saw a person in a red hat sitting on the bench near the lodge. But it was like he sort of noticed them, and then when he looked back, it was like they just disappeared. And he didn't hear like anybody sort of walking or shuffling away. He didn't hear the sound of the doors opening back up, and that was kind of...
That's weird.
Yeah,
that
it's
is
a little
weird.
spooky. It's a little weird, but it's also cool that he was just kind of happening to pass by and was like, yeah, I got something spooky to share.
Yeah, that is neat.
That's cool.
That's a freaky story, though.
Yeah.
The man in the red hat.
The man in the red hat.
Well, thank you for those wonderful tales.
Oh, yeah, my
great.
pleasure.
You
Sorry,
all definitely
I almost
got
had a seizure there. I had something in my throat, and I was trying really hard not to burp into the mic.
That's what we get for making fun of the geese, right? Like,
Yeah.
That's
we're-
fair.
Yeah.
They just force choked me.
I know.
Yep.
But no, thank you for coming on and
that was great.
sharing your stuff. That was nice.
You were
Thanks
an
so much.
excellent guest with excellent radio presence.
Thank you.
Very good
That'd be great.
expertise too. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'll shoot you a DM when we do Mothman. Yeah.
Yes,
Please
yes,
do.
you will
Oh
be
my-
a special Mothman guest.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm
man.
done. I've reached the pinnacle of my career. That is amazing.
Okay, so the last part of our show, as I hinted at earlier, is we're going to go over, well, in each of our own personal opinions, is it real, is it not? So,
I feel like we
about
should
you?
really just talk about the Scottsburg Cemetery because that's.
Yeah.
well, okay.
I mean, ghosts as a whole. You said no blanket statements.
well,
So
yeah,
just-
but like this is more
Yeah.
because no blanket statements, but I still think we should give a percentage to
Well,
something.
how about we give it specifically about the Bridgewater Cemetery?
I'm
since
fine
that
with
was
that.
the main
Yeah,
one.
Yeah.
let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So for you two who might not have been on this before, so I'm going to ask probably 2 different questions, and we're all going to say like from 0 to 100%, like how likely is it that it's real or that like this exists. So the first question I'm going to ask the table is, give me the percentage chance that actual ghosts, like in their classical definition, like these are like souls of people who have died and are either angry or sad, and they are messing with people at the cemetery. Like, give me your percentage chance that at the Bridgewater Cemetery, that is what that is. And I'm going to start with Billy because we're used to giving percentages. So,
honestly, I am going to give it about, I'll say, a 68% chance for the Bridgewater Cemetery.
oh, something I forgot to
Solid.
mention.
Our scale.
We also have an official scale of myths and monsters. 0 to 50, unlikely to
Busted.
Yeah, it's basically busted.
Okay.
50 to 75 is maybe,
Okay.
possibly. And then 75 to 100 is real.
Well, at least very, very hard
Yeah.
to fake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't like to give 100% or 0%, but in our 3-episode run, the 10% we gave out was to the Flatwoods Monster.
R.I.P.
And that
I
was-
was
that
so
was-
sad.
that was
this
with a
is
very-
Courtney leaving the studio.
That was with a very heavy heart that we had to give the
Yeah.
Flatwoods Monster a
which is
0.
one of
come
my
on.
favorite cryptids, and I was
Yes.
heartbroken that I had to
Oh.
give it a 0%.
Come on.
We came to the conclusion that it was a barn owl.
Yeah. So
Stabbed to the heart.
I would say the chance that there are ghosts there, I'm going to say about 75%. Ooh. Because there's just too many stories, too many weird things for there not to be something there.
Oh, wait, okay. So that is a little bit different from what I
Something
gave.
ghostly.
So
Like ghosts in the traditional sense.
Ghosts in the
Like,
so
traditional
ghosts in the
sense.
traditional.
Spirits,
Okay, I got you.
75%.
I got you. I
Yeah.
got you.
Okay, but like I'm gonna challenge a little bit. Like even the traditional sense is different from. Okay, so like what's your definition?
That's a good question.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of like traditional ghosts, I would say that like it's literally like someone dies, something gets sucked out of them, and it's really like angry or peed off or like sad, and it's like I
Okay.
have unfinished business. I'm going to mess with you now, or I'm going to mess with this area. That's what we're
Okay.
talking about right now.
Okay. Is it fair for me then to say like I'm in the 75 to I'm like always in the 75 to 100%?
It's all
like,
good. No.
I'm always like, yeah, why not, man? There's room for weird thoughts in this world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason to have 4 hardened skeptics here. That's not what this is about.
Okay. But is it fair if I say like I believe that it could be like the leftover lingering energies?
See, that's going to be the second question. You're getting ahead of me. You're getting ahead of me.
Oh, okay. I'm sticking with it, man. 75 to 100.
roll with
yes.
it.
Yeah. All right. So
All right.
So what about you?
I'm going to give it a 51%.
That's fair.
Okay. So and now about the energies or something
Okay,
like
so
that.
the second question is, and this could either be a more interesting or more boring question depending on how you feel about it, is at the Bridgewater Cemetery, there exists some kind of supernatural, unexplainable thing there. It just exists.
Okay.
It's there. Like this. Now, this is a little bit. This means it's a little bit more than just a bad feeling. Like it's something a little bit. It's something outside of yourself.
You know, I'm going to have to go ahead and just give that one a 90% because
Yeah,
I think there's
I like
definitely
that.
something wrong with that
I'm
place.
going to give it 90% too.
Nice. I'm just going to be like a rebel and say 110. For
Ooh,
example.
we have our
Nice.
first 110.
I'm going to do that.
110.
And like
Nice. That's gonna be
so-
hard to beat.
to kind of like build on this, like I read like lots of things and people are like theorizing about these things, right? And this dude like Matt Carden, he wrote this book chapter and he had something to kind of say that gets at I think what you were kind of saying, and he basically says the paranormal is a realm of living narrative
I like that a lot.
where the key to understanding is not measurement but meaning.
That's really cool.
And so that's like so much of like my philosophy to it
Yeah.
as well. And so I'm always kind of in the 75 to 100% like camp or 110 because my whole philosophy is like, well, we don't really know, so why not?
There you go.
Yeah. That's
yeah.
cool.
You're a supernatural optimist. I like
Yes.
that. And a few times, like at least with this and Aliens, I would say lowballed with my percentages, but I'm gonna swing the other way now. I'm gonna give it a 99%.
Nice.
Nice.
Very nice. So.
Alrighty,
that's awesome.
so I do think that about wraps us up for the third episode of Myths and
And
Monsters.
it was a banger.
And
let me tell you.
everybody, I just want to give a quick shout out to our good friend Charlie. He is listening tonight. He's been tweeting at us. So,
awesome.
hi, Charlie.
Hi, Charles.
Yep.
Thank you for listening. You're not fired anymore, mostly because
Yeah.
I don't go here anymore and I don't have
Oh.
power over you.
And also, you all should listen to Charlie's show, which is on tomorrow.
Heroes on the Horizon.
6 to 7, and my show, which is right after, from 7 to 8, Dank History Show.
Watch them shows. They're good content.
And you can follow our social medias. We're at monsters_myths on Twitter and at myths_monsters on Instagram. And Courtney, do you have anything to plug?
Please plug.
Oh my gosh. Well, please make it out to the Haunted IUS walking tour if you can. Monday, October 28th, 7:30, Clock Tower. You can also find the library on social media at IUS Library on Twitter and IU Southeast Library on Instagram and IU Southeast Library on Facebook.
Awesome.
Alrighty, and be sure to come back next week because Myths and Monsters will be back. And next
What
week,
we talking about?
looking
Tell
forward to
them.
this
Tell the people.
because
Tell the people.
we are headed south of the border, hopping in our
Oh,
flying
yes.
sombrero to investigate the good old classic goat sucker, the
Yes!
chupacabra.
La Chupacabra.
So you knew exactly what I was talking about when I said goat sucker, didn't you?
I love it. Yes,
Great.
I might also have one of those buttons.
Oh,
I
nice. I really hope you have a cryptid button for just every occasion.
Yeah,
awesome.
I'll make it. That's
Anyway,
a goal.
thank you guys very much for listening. As always, I am